Okay, so this is Overcoming Hard to Predict Branches with the Bullseye Predictor. I'm Emet from the University of British Columbia. So the first thing we'll look at is Tage in the present day. So for many years now, as you've seen, Tage has consistently been a state-of-the-art predictor, but with larger branch predictor budgets today, we find that Tage no longer scales well and has diminishing returns on MPK and performance. So, for example, if we scaled up all the way to a 192 kilobyte version of Tage, we would have a marginal performance increase over a much smaller version of Tage, given the hardware overhead incurred. And recent improvements in Tage in the last competition included a statistical corrector and a loop predictor. Specifically, these components helped deal with weaknesses in the base Tage predictor, and so in that sense, we wanted to look at what weaknesses the Tage SAL had and try to face those, and we found that so-called hard to predict branches were the largest weakness, and so we figured that we should focus on trying to solve these hard to predict branches. So hard to predict branches can generally be defined as branches that have poor accuracy despite having frequent executions. Could be lots of reasons for this. Common ones might be data dependency, complex correlation patterns between branches, or correlations between distant branches. In general, for these hard to predict branches, we see high history variation, meaning it's quite difficult to correlate with a typical local or global history. And so we propose a bullseye predictor, and in the next couple of slides we'll be going over how it works. And so it focuses on identifying hard to predict branches, tracking information for these hard to predict branches, and using a targeted prediction. And we try to solve the hard to predict branches with a local history and a global history perceptron. So the very first thing to do is to identify what the hard to predict branches are. So we use a cache-like structure here. So for each branch so first we start with just Tage SCL making the predictions, and we keep track of the execution count and the misprediction count of each branch that Tage solves. And we update the table on conditional branch resolve, and of course keeping track of these hard to predict branches is not part of the prediction critical path. And so once we have lots of information about the execution counts and the misprediction counts of the branches, we can identify something as a hard to predict branch based on some dynamic threshold. So the threshold is based on a minimum execution count, a minimum misprediction count, and an accuracy threshold. And to make it better suited for varying workloads, we have our thresholds change dynamically based on the number of hard to predict branches we've already identified. So once a branch is identified as hard to predict based on the criteria we've set, it's put into a FIFO and eventually into a short list of hard to predict branches that are intended for targeted prediction. At prediction time, the perceptrons predict in parallel to Tage SCL for the specifically for the active H2P branches. For a general branch, we default to Tage SCL, so there's the standard Tage SCL latency. And of course, we do use perceptron-based predictors for the hard to predict branches here, but there's no reason they have to be perceptron-based predictors, and you could really use any kind of predictor in its place. Predictor arbitration. So when we're predicting a hard to predict branch, we end up with a prediction from Tage and a prediction from the perceptrons, and we choose this based on the confidence of Tage, the confidence of the perceptron based on its magnitude, and whichever of the two has historically performed better. And we try to use several miscellaneous methods to improve the overall structure. And so one thing we noticed is sometimes the perceptrons were overconfident in the perceptrons early on, and so we have a trial phase. So once an HTTP branch is identified wait for some trial period before we actually use these predictions. And of course, if we find that the local history perceptron or the global history perceptron are failing to predict these branches relative to TAGE or performing poor relative to TAGE, we evict them. So, to be clear, we have separate lists for the local history and global history perceptron. So, for example, if we find that a given hard to predict branch is performing well with the local history perceptron, but poorly for the global history perceptron, we will evict it from the global history perceptron list and only predict it with the local history perceptron from then on. Once we're confident that one of our perceptrons are doing well and are superior to TAGE for that given hard to predict branch, we filter updates from TAGE for the specified branch. So to be clear, the list is not the same for the local and global history, for the local and global history perceptrons. And so yeah, we had varied results here. At the bottom, so our Bullseye is built on a 159 kilobyte version of TAGE. So for that size, we were able to get an MPKI of 3.45, and then provided with a 192 kilobyte version of TAGE SCL that had an MPKI of 3.427, and adding onto our Bullseye at a total of 187 kilobytes, we had an MPKI of about 3.4. And we took a look at the performance across different workloads. So we see that on the left side there, we looked at the relative change in MPKI sort of between the 187 kilobyte Bullseye predictor and the 192 kilobyte TAGE predictor, and we noticed that for a lot of workloads, Bullseye performs better than TAGE, but not across the board. There were still several workloads that performed better on just simply a larger version of TAGE SCL. And similar trend here for cycles wasted, where some performs better on TAGE, some performs better on Bullseye. And yeah, so in conclusion, we discovered that identifying and tracking these hard to predict branches was an effective method for more targeted prediction and very space efficient. And it doesn't have to affect the prediction critical path in tracking the hard to predict branches. And we found it was effective to have the targeted predictors specifically for the hard to predict branches. Future work. So we used 2 perceptrons as our targeted predictors, but of course they don't have 2 perceptrons again. One thing that our Bullseye predictor doesn't have is any kind of tracking for data dependency. So for data dependent hard to predict branches, you could potentially add another predictor. And of course, it's designed to be modular. So we use TAGE as the base predictor, but there's no reason it has to be TAGE SCL. You could really use any kind of base predictor. And given the time constraints in the competition, we believe that further performance could be realized with some tuning of the hyperparameters of Bullseye. And yeah, that's all. Any questions?
Thank you.